A British military base has been hit by a drone. RAF Akrotiri, a sovereign British air base in Cyprus, attacked. And who is sending a warship to defend it? Not Britain, France. The French are dispatching a frigate and air defense systems to protect a British base because we apparently cannot do it ourselves. Nigel Farage erupted. The Shadow Defence Secretary demanded to know why a Royal Navy warship wasn't already there. And Downing Street? They refused to say whether having France defend a British base was embarrassing. Here's what we're going to uncover today. 1. How RAF Akrotiri was struck by a drone and why our defenses failed to prevent it. 2. Why France is having to send warships to protect British sovereign territory and what that says about the state of our armed forces. And 3. How decades of defense cuts by both Labour and the Conservatives have brought us to the most humiliating moment in modern British military history. A foreign nation is defending a British base. Let that sink in. This is what they've done to our country. Let's start with what happened, because the timeline is critical and it exposes just how chaotic the government's decision-making has been. On Sunday, Keir Starmer granted permission for the United States to use British bases for strikes on Iran. He framed it as defensive, targeting missile storage depots, specific and limited, the usual legalistic hedging. But here's what happened hours before that announcement. A drone hit RAF Akrotiri, a British sovereign air base on the island of Cyprus. Not a base in a war zone, not an outpost in hostile territory, a major RAF installation on an island in the Mediterranean. A drone got through and struck a British base. Now think about the sequence of events. Starmer initially refused to grant the U.S. permission to use British bases. Then Akrotiri was hit, and then, within hours, he reversed his position and said yes. Was the attack the trigger? Was Starmer's hand forced by an Iranian drone striking British sovereign territory? Because if so, the decision wasn't strategic, it was reactive, panicked. A prime minister who didn't want to act, forced into action by an attack he should have anticipated and prevented. And that raises the most damning question of all. If we knew British bases could be targeted, and everyone in the defense establishment knew this was a possibility, why were the defenses inadequate? Why did a drone get through? But it gets worse, much worse. Because when it became clear that RAF Akrotiri was vulnerable, it wasn't the Royal Navy that stepped in, it was the French. Paris announced plans to dispatch a frigate and air defense systems to Cyprus to defend a British base, a French warship sailing to protect British sovereign territory because Britain doesn't have the naval assets in place to do it. Nigel Farage didn't hold back. He said this is what Labour and the Tories have reduced us to. He reminded everyone of the most basic principle of government, one that both parties have abandoned. Defense of the realm is the first duty of any government. They have both failed at this task miserably. He's right. And the fact that it's the leader of a party with 5 seats who has to say it tells you everything about the state of the two parties that have governed this country for the last century. Shadow Defence Secretary James Cartlidge was equally furious. He demanded that HMS Duncan, a Type 45 destroyer with advanced air defense capabilities, be sent immediately, and then he asked the question that nobody in government wants to answer. Why wasn't she already there? Why indeed? We knew the Middle East was escalating. We knew Iran had the capability to strike at range. We knew British bases in Cyprus were potential targets, and yet there was no Royal Navy warship positioned to defend them. Now stay with me, because towards the end of this video, I'm going to show you exactly how badly our naval capability has been hollowed out over the past 2 decades, and the numbers will shock you. When you see how few warships Britain actually has available right now, you'll understand why France had to step in. Keep watching. So what did the government say when asked about this humiliation? Let's look at the responses, because they are a masterclass in evasion.
Foreign Secretary Yvette Cooper was sent to the Commons. She insisted the government has already increased the deployment to Cyprus, additional defensive capabilities, radar, F-35 jets, air defense systems, counter-drone systems. Sounds impressive when you list it like that, but here's the problem. If those systems were already in place, how did a drone hit the base? If radar was deployed, why didn't it detect the incoming threat in time? If counter-drone systems were operational, why didn't they neutralize it? Either the systems weren't there when Cooper claims they were, or they were there and they failed. Both answers are devastating. And then Downing Street was asked directly, is it embarrassing that France is sending warships to defend a British base? The Prime Minister's official spokesman refused to answer, refused to comment on other countries. Instead, they repeated the same talking points: radar systems, air defense, F-35 jets, significant level of defensive capability. That's not an answer. That's a script, a pre-prepared deflection designed to avoid acknowledging the single most humiliating fact of this entire crisis, that Britain, a nuclear-armed nation, a permanent member of the UN Security Council, a country that once ruled a quarter of the globe, cannot defend its own military base without help from the French. There was a time when Britannia ruled the waves. Now Britannia can't even protect an airfield in Cyprus. Now here are the numbers I promised you, and they explain everything. In 1990, the Royal Navy had approximately 50 major surface warships, destroyers and frigates capable of projecting power and defending British interests around the world. Today, we have 19. 19! And of those, at any given time, a significant number are in refit, in maintenance, or otherwise unavailable to deploy. Defense analysts estimate that Britain can reliably deploy around 6 to 8 major surface combatants at any one time. 6 to 8 warships for a nation with overseas territories spanning every ocean, with commitments to NATO, with bases in Cyprus, Gibraltar, the Falklands, and Diego Garcia, at least for now, before Starmer gives that away too. This is not a new problem. This is 30 years of systematic, bipartisan destruction of British defense capability. The Conservatives cut the Navy, Labour cut it further, the Conservatives cut it again, and now Labour is in charge of a military that cannot defend a single base in the Mediterranean without French assistance. Farage was right to point the finger at both parties. This is a shared failure, a shared betrayal. Successive governments, Labour and Conservative, looked at the defense budget and saw it as an easy target. They cut ships, they cut regiments, they cut personnel. They hollowed out the armed forces while simultaneously expanding Britain's international commitments. And now the bill has come due. In the most dangerous geopolitical environment since the Cold War, with Russia in Ukraine, China threatening Taiwan, Iran attacking British bases, and the Middle East in flames, Britain cannot defend itself. The 2% of GDP target for defense spending that NATO requires, Britain has barely met it, and 2% itself is widely considered inadequate for a country with Britain's global responsibilities. Serious defense analysts have been calling for 3% or higher for years. Both parties have ignored them. And so here we are. A drone hits a British base, France sends a warship to defend it because Britain doesn't have the naval assets in place to do it alone. Nigel Farage says both Labour and the Tories have failed in the most basic duty of government. The shadow Defence Secretary is asking why HMS Duncan wasn't already in position, and the answer is simple, because the political class that has governed this country for 30 decades does not take defense seriously. They never have. They view the military as a ceremonial prop for Remembrance Sunday and a budget line to be raided whenever the Treasury needs savings. The men and women who serve in our armed forces are extraordinary. They are brave, professional, and among the best-trained military personnel in the world. But they have been let down, systematically, deliberately, and repeatedly by the politicians who send them into harm's way without the resources to do the job. So, let's bring it together. RAF Akrotiri, a British sovereign base, was struck by a drone. France is sending a warship to defend it because Britain doesn't have the naval assets in place to do it alone. Nigel Farage says both Labour and the Tories have failed in the most basic duty of government. The shadow Defence Secretary is asking why HMS Duncan wasn't already in position.
And Downing Street can't even bring itself to admit this is embarrassing. This is what 30 years of defense cuts look like. Not in a white paper, not in a parliamentary debate, in the real world, where a drone hits your base and you have to call France for help. Defense of the realm is the first duty of any government, and both parties that have governed this country have failed at it, completely, utterly, unforgivably. If you agree that this government is failing, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because this crisis is escalating by the hour, and someone needs to hold them accountable.